Hello, my fine friends. Welcome to the Tom Petty Project podcast. I am your host, Kevin Brown. Before I start the intro, I just wanted to give a shout out to my friend, the wonderful, generous, and very hilarious Gwen Jones, who was a guest on season 2, if you remember, and if you listened to that episode. She sent me this wicked custom beer koozie. You can see that there, with my podcast name on it, and then a photo of Tom on the back, along with another one. This one, and I am feeling petty today. And so I just wanted to sort of say thank you for that. And she sent me this wonderful note that I'm going to read to you as well. So it says, "Hi Kevin, thanks for all you do to keep Tom alive and in our hearts, and for being such a great guy. Stay petty, Gwen." And then there's a footnote that says, "So now you have a one of a kind Tom koozie." So again, thank you so much, Gwen. Currently, I am utilizing the koozie to drink a wonderful 11.6% imperial dessert stout called tiramisu, which is brewed by a craft brewery called Blackbridge Brewery in Swift Current, Saskatchewan. So if you're ever in our fine province, make sure you check out Blackbridge. They're a great brewery. Okay, back to it. Today's episode is a special mid-season interview episode with the inimitable Paul Zollo. Those of you who listen to the podcast regularly will recognize his name instantly, as I reference that in every episode, the book Conversations with Tom Petty, because it's got an incredible wealth of information about pretty much every song up to the last 3 albums, which are the only ones that aren't covered. And if you haven't checked that book out, make sure you get your hands on it, whether you do an ebook or you go pick a hard copy up. Please go do that. And I'm thinking that toward the end of this season, I'm going to grab one of those books and I'll do another giveaway, and I'll send that to someone so that you can share my passion for digging into the music in some depth. I hope that everyone's safe and healthy out there. And rather than blather on too endlessly, why don't I just get you right into the conversation that I had with Paul a couple 3 weeks ago, and I'll chat to you again at the end. Okay, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my fine friends. Welcome to the Tom Petty Project podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Brown. I'm extremely honored and very happy to be joined tonight by Paul Zollo. Paul is an editor, a journalist, a writer, a singer, a songwriter, a musician, an author, and of course, most importantly, to the Tom Petty community, the man who brought Conversations with Tom Petty to all of us. Welcome to the podcast, Paul.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Very happy to be here. I love to talk about Tom anytime, as I've told you.
I'm finding that most people do. Whenever you ask, would you like to jump online and talk about Tom Petty? People say, yes, definitely. I think he had that effect on people, right?
You know, of all people to write a book about him, and he was beloved with good reason. You know, he was such a great person and amazing, musician over decades, but really a good person who cared about his fans more than most big rock stars,
Yeah, and demonstrably too, right? I mean, he went to the wall for his fans with Hard Promises, and again with different in different avenues where he thought he wouldn't raise his ticket prices, or he didn't want to rip people off, and wanted to make sure that anyone who wanted to come and see the Heartbreakers play could do that, which I think is maybe that is what's endeared him to so many people.
Yeah, because he always remembered he was that kid who wanted to go see shows, and he didn't want to, as he said, outprice his audience. It was always the people, and he always kept that in mind. And he thought, they were only raising his album. It was an LP, $1.
Yeah,
I think it was from $8.98 to $9.98. But he would have been the first of the artists. And he just figured they're going to think, Tom wanted to do this, and he just didn't feel good about it. But so he fought it, but he assumed his peers would join him, and no one joined him.
Yeah,
it was just not a thing that people did, was to fight the companies like that over, they usually just accepted that kind of stuff. But Tom did that,
Yeah, and I mean, even so far as The Last DJ, that's not a single act. That's a full album pushing back against. Well, the first half of a full album pushing back against what he saw as corporate greed and inauthenticity and those types of things that have crept into music slowly. And I mean, my God, I think if you looked at it now, I don't know what he would think. So.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you brought that up. People don't often mention that, but because he has this reputation as this laid back, easygoing guy, everything's groovy. And he was not that.
Yeah.
In fact, his daughter said, he told me that his daughter told him that, Dad, everyone thinks you're so laid back and like this cool hippie, and you are so not that.
Yeah.
He's very concerned, but he just was so friendly. He felt that, it seemed that way. But many times he really fought for things. But The Last DJ was unusual. I mean, that you'd write a whole album.
Yeah.
But it really, the purity of rock and roll and of radio as he grew up with it mattered to Tom. That's what it was all about. When we were growing up, I grew up in America, 8 years younger than him, but I was part of listening to the radio and AM radio and remembering the Beatles when they first came to our shores.
Yeah.
And it was pretty exciting, especially I was very young, but we just had Kennedy just months before then. Boy, that was a good change. I mean, they revitalized this country in such a way, and obviously Tom, that was momentous for him. But when we were listening to radio, it's because the songs we heard was because people liked them. They'd hear songs on the radio and they went and bought them.
Yeah.
And so it was democratic in some ways. And when that shifted, when the DJs couldn't make their own choices about rock and roll, Tom felt we're losing the whole game here. It's the game. We're losing the mission. And so he spoke out. But at the same time, he also told me that it was meant as a metaphor for everything. I used that one. But when people listen to rock and roll, they're not looking for metaphor, especially from Tom, but really from anyone. They're, is that a metaphor? No, they just hear them, and I think they often assume it's 100% direct, from how he feels. But he was writing about characters, and he didn't want to denigrate anyone personally. But when we were doing our book, he talked about being on certain festivals. He said they were female. They say they call them rock stars, and he didn't want to name by name. He said huge sensation, and I was watching the sound check, and they cannot sing, and it's okay, call them pop stars, but please don't call them musicians, because they are not musicians. And that mattered to him. It was all about purity to him. And when the biggest pop stars in this country started to become people that couldn't even sing on tune, or play anything or write songs, that's not what it was about for Tom. He held on to that purity of rock and roll, but he was one of the last ones. I mean, Stones are trying to go in, but
with a sense of humility about it too, right? And I think that's again something that is lacking at times, and I think maybe is one of the things certainly that endears Tom to people, is that he never came out, and he would never have dreamed of doing what Kanye did at Glastonbury. Is that you are now listening to the greatest rock star on the planet? Oh, come on, dude, really? You don't even have a band. Like, get over yourself. Tom would never have even entered his head to do something like that, right? Or that grandiose.
Quite the opposite. He puts himself down,
Yeah.
He said, with my limited musical talent, he goes, I'm not really even a musician. Like, come on, you're not a musician. People, you would think that because he didn't technically know the names of, that would be a G minor 6, with that. But that didn't matter. McCartney didn't necessarily know how to name the chords either, but he, brilliant with chords and with melody. I mean, a brilliant songwriter.
It's feel, right? I mean, it's you can feel, you don't know what the name of the chord is, but you know that it sounds perfect. So don't worry about what it's called.
Yeah, and he said even people that would learn our songs, they didn't get the voicings right, because often it was him and Mike doing two different things on the guitars, and their voicings were always interesting. But it kind of bothered him too. He said, people would often tell him that they thought it was easy what he did. It seemed easy, and he said, if they think it's easy, they should try doing it. He worked so hard. He was so good at it that it seemed easy. Like the songs seemed effortless, but sometimes they were. But they were often the result of a lot of work and focus and diligence.
Yeah, and a great example of that is the last episode that I did that was released today is Here Comes My Girl. That's a great example of it, right? So he gets this great guitar track from Mike and learns it off the tape and sit there, and he's got the chorus, he's got that kind of figured out, has no idea what the hell to do with the verse. And then Ron Blair comes over and says, man, that's a hell of a piece of music there. So he sticks with it, and eventually that sort of falls to, okay, well, the narration will work there. And of course, like you said, I mean, for every Wildflowers where lightning in a bottle just strikes and it comes out in one take, there's 20 Here Comes My Girls where you've really got to work out, well, where do we go with this? Where do we move it? How do we lift it? Are we putting too much in? Are we leaving too much out?
Right. But he keeps working it till it seems that it was, that it was perfect. You don't sense that at all when you Here Comes My Girl. And there's many of those, like You Wreck Me.
Yeah.
Took him a year. He said he had You Rock.
Yes.
It's close, but he had his modular system of songwriting, as he called it, that every section of the song has to be equally good. And that kind of focus is why his songs sustain and they're so great over the years. And they had great melodies, and he just wouldn't settle. If the bridge wasn't good enough, it didn't get in. If it didn't have a good intro. And sometimes, he'd work 5-6 hours just to get the bridge right, but he would do it. He'd stay there. Sometimes he would complain about it, that it was lonely, hard work, but he loved that more than anything.
Well, I think, once you see, and obviously because he'd done it so many times, once you see the product come out the other end, once you see the sort of the end result of, oh, well, actually, you know, I've punched the wall and broken my hand and been told I'll never play again. But at the end of it, we did get to where we needed to get to. And same thing with Stan, right? You know, with the hours and hours on end hitting that snare drum and nope, that's not right. Let's get a new head in. Let's bring a new thing. We'll have to retune it. Okay, yeah, but then you get Refugee sounding like Refugee sounds, and it has to sound that way.
Those are two examples Tom would find somewhat painful. I think Stan and breaking his hand against the wall. That one was like a little extreme. That's because he was on coke, and that was kind of a sign that time to stop doing coke, you know, because he couldn't get it right. And you know, as he said in the book, he smashed his hand to powder. I mean, he really smashed his hand, and they thought for sure he'd never play again. It was really painful for about a year, but he got it back. But that's awful that happened, you know.
Well, thank goodness Thank goodness, though, that, you know, because some people don't manage to pull back from that cliff, right? I remember listening to George Carlin talking about that and saying that, you know, he was doing so much weed at one point that it was diminishing returns, and he was doing more weed than writing jokes, and the jokes weren't as good. So he sort of said, well, I've got to leave that now because it's interfering with what I actually love doing, which is writing jokes. And I think Tom probably must have been an epiphany to say, okay, well, that's probably a line that needs to be drawn in the sand there, right?
Yeah. And, you know, people thought he was smoking pot all the time, but he didn't. He wouldn't smoke for like a session, so maybe for like when you listen to it afterwards, but he was a pro, you know, he really was. And that's why he did so much work, you know, I mean, he got a lot done. You know, 40 years, you know, a short period of time.
Well,
when he wasn't with the Heartbreakers, he was making other albums or put together Mudcrutch, you know, he didn't want to stop.
Yeah, I'm touring with Dylan. I mean, for God's sakes. And that's the other thing that I always think with Tom that I get frustrated with when I'm talking to, you know, quote unquote lay people who maybe don't know music very well or don't know Tom's music very well is, you know, yeah, he's a great songwriter, and you know Free Fallin', you know Won't Back Down, you know the hits, and he's, you know, he's known as a songwriter, but a phenomenal musician on top of that, a great rhythm guitarist, a massively underappreciated singer for me. And you don't get, you know, and the Heartbreakers too, brilliant music. You don't get to go play with Dylan on tour if you can't play, because Dylan changes the friggin' set every night. You've got to be on your toes, you've got to be able to react.
Absolutely. I mean, to interrupt you, but they're an amazing band. I mean, the Heartbreakers.
Yeah.
I mean, Ben Montench alone, Mike Campbell. I mean, those are two of the greatest musicians in rock and roll. And, I mean, and Stan was great. And losing, you know, having to fire Stan wasn't easy for Tom, but he didn't want to always work with somebody he was always fighting with. But he was a great musician. And that was one reason he loved to write so much too, even during when they were doing Echo, which, you know, is considered a very sad album, and is sad. But he loved recording it. And he said, you know, he'd have so much fun. He just wanted to go home that night and, you know, write another song so he had something to bring in the next day.
Yeah.
One of the reasons he wrote so much, he just loved recording with those guys. But also, he didn't dictate to them at all. You know, they like Room at the Top, you know, where like on the second verse, suddenly it just, you know, like, it comes in with big drums and huge guitar.
Yep.
That was them, you know, like Mike and Steve Froney just felt that.
Yeah.
And Tom, you know, it's a very delicate song. Tom said, I would have never thought that. And that's one reason. I mean, so that was real rock and roll. It was really playing with the band and discovering the song in the studio. That's another reason why they could play with Dylan, because that's what Dylan was all about. It wasn't about, you know, being Steely Dan. I mean, I love Steely Dan, but that's not, I really do, but it's not that, you know, it's more, you know, rock and roll. I mean, but, you know, Tom loved that too. It was a huge honor to Tom, but Dylan wanted to do more, and Tom felt that he had to go back, you know.
Yeah.
That was a big deal for Tom to say no to Bob Dylan. Now, I've had enough of you, Bob.
Can you imagine? It's like Dave Grohl, when Dave Grohl said the same thing to Tom, right? After the SNL gig, when he'd said, you know, you've got the gig if you want it. Like, how do you say no to Tom Petty? It's the same level of, I don't know if this is the right decision, you know?
Yeah, you're right. But
you got the Heartbreaks to go back to, so I suppose really it's a no lose situation, isn't it?
It was a long time, and but it was great for them too. It was funny, you know. Sometimes Dylan, he said, would just to mess with them, would throw in a song that no one knew, like an Ink Spot song,
right?
And Tom, no one knows it except Benmont, of course. And then Benmont would play anything immediately. You know, he's one of the guys. You know?
Yeah.
And he couldn't throw Benmont.
Yeah,
but also Dylan had a famous like crisis of confidence during that he spoke of it. Seeing Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers for Dylan was daunting.
Yeah.
And, you know, it was in Sweden that he had kind of a breakdown. Like, I can't do this. I don't know how to do this anymore. You guys got it down, you know. Tom was really surprised by that.
Well, and I think it's in the book where he says, or in an interview where he says that Dylan said they're coming to see you, not me. You know, which again, as petty, you think, oh my god, well, I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think that was true at all.
No,
I mean, they were
all.
coming to see both.
Yeah,
I went. Did you see it? Must have been very young.
No, I would have been too young, and I didn't get into Petty until, like, deeply into Tom Petty until I would say about 6 or 7 years ago. So of course, timing wise, it was bad because I didn't get to see him play live, but I did get 20 albums to just go and binge on and get into a huge catalog of work. So
that's the great thing that he left us such good work. I mean, you got the albums. That's him. I mean, he put everything in those albums. He didn't. There's not one of them that's kind of filler or wasn't fully engaged.
Not at all. And I was talking with a guest on season 1, Dallas Hellicker, about this. We were saying that when you look at the arc, most artists, when they get to their 60s, the big rock acts, they tend to sort of plateau and they'll go and do it. It really becomes a sort of a greatest hits tour, and that's fine because they still love the songs and the fans still love hearing them. But Mojo and Hypnotic Eye is a band that's growing upwards. That's a band that's not even reached its pinnacle yet for me, because that album is just absolutely stunning from front to back. Absolutely amazing.
I mention it. Yeah, I think I agree. I love that. Fault Lines, that song, and American Dream Part B. That's quite a song.
No, and Fault Lines is, I think, you're talking about the contribution of the other band members. That drum part that Steve Ferroni plays on that song, with that kind of, it's almost like a little bossa nova that he's playing on the ride, but it's got the big crash. It's got the big sort of sound on the kick drum. Just absolutely perfect. And I don't know. Obviously, I don't think Mike or Tom ever demoed drums, so that would have been Steve sitting and listening to that riff and thinking, "Yeah, this is the way to play this." And I'll just add this little bit of Latin flair into it too. By the way,
yeah, they might have, they did different takes, so they might, but Ferroni had a great. Tom said at first they just kept telling him, play less. I mean, they don't have to play. They really want it simple, especially after, I think, Stan.
Yeah,
but Ferroni's great. He's so great. He was there for decades, and they never quite accepted him. He was always the new guy, wasn't he?
Yeah, that's his nickname. Yeah.
Old fans kind of resented him in some way. I mean, they love him, but
that's so funny though. I always find that strange when fans take a side against, either someone leaving the band or joining the band. Like, you're not in the room. Like, you don't know what's going on. Like, the band knows. Trust that it's the band's decision and it's the best for everyone, right? So, and it's not like Stan. It's not like Stan left and did nothing else ever after. He had a great career after that, right? So,
did he? I don't know that much about what he did afterward, but it definitely wasn't easy for Tom to do that. None of those kind of things for Tom were easy. He really cared about people. Like when Howie got sick and had problems with her. Tom took that so deeply. He wasn't one of those guys like, he's out of here, gotta give me another bass player, by any means.
It's not Billy Joel, So I wanted to just kind of dig back a little bit. Before we got on our emails, you said that obviously you live in LA and you've been there for a long time now, but you grew up in Chicago, right?
Yes.
So what was your childhood like?
I was in the suburbs, which was very idyllic, but very close to the city. And I love music more than anything. I remember when the Beatles first came on the radio in '64. It just sounded different. I was listening to it now, those voices together, and I Want to Hold Your Hand, the harmonies, the minor chords,
Yeah.
Wow. And then they were on radio a lot, we were always listening to those little tiny transistors. So music seemed so exciting immediately. And I got obsessed also with Simon and Garfunkel.
Right.
I just love Simon and Garfunkel. And I started playing guitar like around 10 and writing songs immediately, imitating Paul Simon. I was just really into Simon. And later I got obsessed with Dylan, and I liked him, but I didn't really understand him as a kid. And Beatles, obviously. Not obviously, but they were huge, Beatles. But also my dad was really into folk music, Pete Seeger.
Yeah.
And, the message of folk music. And so I was raised on that, and Woody Guthrie and that too. So I loved all kinds. And my mom loved standards, all those songs that Sinatra sang.
Right.
And so I studied piano, and I just loved all kinds of songs. But I was drawn to rock and roll mostly, and writing my own songs. And my first songs were, I was like 10, but I was imitating other songs. But that's how everyone starts, pretty much.
Oh, of course, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you don't have any experience to draw from when you're 10 years old, 11 years old, right?
Exactly, you got to imitate. Yeah.
Yeah.
If Pete Seeger says, all songwriters are links in a chain. That's true. No one starts in a vacuum. You've heard some music. That's why you want to do it, right? There's something you heard that. But I was in college. I went to college at Boston University, and when I first heard Tom, I remember my girlfriend was really into him. Springsteen was pretty new then too. He was just kind of emerging, and Elvis Costello. I didn't necessarily trust those guys, right? When I first saw Elvis Costello, he didn't look like a rocker to me. I grew to love him, but you first heard Tom, and look, some people was like, yeah, that's really good, but is he just imitating? Is he trying to sound like Roger McGuinn? He's kind of like Dylan. Yeah. But then another great song, and then it's like he did so many great songs. I figured he'd probably peak, after 2 years of that with all those MTV hits.
Yep.
They had so many, but he just kept going, and it's remarkable. I knew he was good, but then it's really became remarkable with the reinvention of Full Moon Fever, and that wasn't easy either to leave his band, even temporarily. That was a big deal for him, but sonically and musically, and the joy and simplicity that he found in those songs, and from there on in, because he learned a new way of recording too, which helped.
Yep.
Recording was really kind of torturous for him prior to that, and then that was just so remarkable up to Full Moon Fever, and then Wildflowers, and that's when I first interviewed him. They sent me just advance. It was on cassette tape at the time. I'd be riding my bike through Griffith Park in Los Angeles, listening, not knowing what's on this. And it's like, well, that's a great song. It's like it's so many great songs because overflowing with songs during Wildflowers, which I learned later. His marriage was already falling apart. He was still living in Encino with Jane, and that's when I first met him. Though I didn't see her, but he was in a great mood. I first met him, so I interviewed him. It was for Song Talk magazine. I was interviewing. It was the Journal of the National Academy of Songwriters. It was on newsprint originally, and then I interviewed. Tried to interview all the great songwriters, but really about songwriting because I'm a songwriter myself, and I had a band, and I'd interviewed Dylan prior to that, and Tom noticed that one, and I went backstage at a show that he was at, the Troubadours of Folk show that he was doing with Roger McGuinn.
Okay.
Which was at UCLA. And some people you go right up to him backstage. That's not cool. But Tom was cool, and also I think he could sense that I was okay. But he had read the Dylan interview, and I asked him if he would consider doing an interview, and he said, yeah, absolutely. And Mary Clouser was his one of his two managers for 40 years.
Yep.
Was right there, and he told her to set it up. And sometimes they say that and the managers don't set it up. They go, sure, but Mary was always so cool. And so she set it up, and that was my first interview with him. And then I interviewed him many times after that for different things. And then I kind of came up with the idea of doing a book. And at the time, there hadn't been any books about him.
Yeah.
And people wanted a book, so it was good timing. And so we did the book, and we got together every Saturday for over a year, for a couple of hours, meet around noon, because that's when he would get up. He was just getting up. He always had a lot of, he'd be real sleepy, but he was always cool. He never once was like in a bad mood or anything. He was great.
I think, just as a songwriter yourself, and I mean, I'm a hobbyist songwriter, having access to one of your songwriting heroes to dig into to really nerd out about the music itself and not bothered about the stories from the road and meeting this person, that person, but just, okay, why did you use that snare sound there? Why did you drop the bass out in this section? Being able to ask those questions, that's just a dream come true. So do you remember the first session you went to? Obviously you'd met him a few times and interviewed him, multiple times, but that first session, knowing that you're going down this road now and it's going to be a bigger project, how did you feel that first session? How did it go?
Joyful. Tom was a joyful guy. There were some people I'd meet with and you could sense they were nervous. I won't name names, but they were nervous.
Yeah.
They were comfortable and didn't necessarily trust me. He was in a good mood. I did interview him, during his sad period after he left Jane, when he was living at the Chicken Shack, and he wasn't like that at all. It was like he was gone. But during the Wildflowers, and he was in a great mood. And after that, when we did the book, he was in a great mood. But he was an easy person to talk to. Some other people that are more guarded.
Yeah.
And I mean, he already knew that I had a great respect for songwriters. I interviewed Paul Simon at great length. And those were what my interviews were, like you mentioned, where I could get into those things. And I was doing it for myself, just like you would, as much as for the people that love those people too. But, that bridge, did you come up with that chord? I mean, but songwriters so rarely get that chance to talk about and then you went to the B minor, and and yet that's where so much of their genius is. And he loved that I reverse engineered all the songs as I knew the chords, and I learned the song. And I remember the first time I told him I learned, he goes, "Oh, you learned all the songs." And I like that because they're, as you probably know, I'm sure they're deceptively simple, a lot of them, but they're not necessarily simple at all, the way he uses chords. And almost always they, sorry?
Yeah, not at all. I mean, Go ahead, sorry.
Chord or there's usually one chord, not many that shouldn't be there, but he uses it in a brilliant way, so he's kind of ingenious with chord. I mean, absolutely ingenious.
And all of them too. I mean, Mike and Ron as well. And there's a bit in that I only noticed because, with the podcast, I sit and really, same thing you would have done, really listen to the songs. Now I'm just listening to the bass. Now I'm just listening to the drums. Now I might just only be listening to the snare. I might only listen to the kick. And there's a bit in, I think it's in the bridge in Here Comes My Girl, where they're playing those suspended chords, but Ron is playing an arpeggio in a straight major. And he's not playing it's not the same chord that everyone else is playing. And when you hear it, it's like, that is so frigging clever, because it gives such a sonic width to that little section that you just wouldn't have if you didn't have that third note coming in, because Benmont's playing first and fifth, and the other guys are playing their suspended chords, and Ron sits in with the 1-3-5 in the chord progression. It's just so cool. And when you notice those little things like that, and you notice at least one of those things in every single song, there's something like that in every single song, certainly so far that I've noticed.
Yeah, I mean, the production was always nice, but tasteful too. It would overload. There'd be bits of that, and certain guitar sounds that Mike would use, and his slide playing on certain places. And Tom played drums pretty well. He played on Highway Companion. He played all the drums, which he recorded at home.
Yep.
But he's humble about that. He goes, I couldn't play live. I'm not a great drummer, but I could do it at home because you could fix it. But that's pretty good. Now there's not many guitar players I know that can play drums. I can't play drums. I don't know how to do though.
Yeah. So, as you said, like coming into this, writing this book and this project, there weren't any other Tom Petty. There was no biography out there. We didn't have YouTube back then, so you couldn't sort of research that way. What sort of research did you do other than listening to the songs? Because obviously you did get into a little bit of his life, because you found out that you definitely needed that context to explain some of those musical directions that he found. So what was your research process for something like that?
Well, back then, it was harder to do research, but I'd go to the library and, there'd be magazine stories. Rolling Stone would have interviews, TV shows. No, actually, I couldn't find TV shows. That was later. But I guess it's mostly magazine stories. I was just thinking, I was reading the book, like, where did I get that information from? Because it's so much easier now. Of course, a lot that you get nowadays might not be valid at all. It has to be a good source, but because there's so much there. But I did as much as I could. I'd get interviews, but there was a lot I didn't know about. Like the thing about his grandfather killing a guy. That was the reason they had to move from Georgia. I just heard that as a rumor, but I wasn't sure that was true. So sometimes I would just fish around. Like, is that even true? I expected that wasn't. I was surprised.
Such a cool story, though.
Yeah. We didn't plan originally to talk about his life at all. The original plan was we're just going to talk about music and all the songs, even the ones that were not official albums, the ones that were on, the anthology and stuff. But his life and his music were intertwined. And stories like that were so cool. I mean, that story is because his grandfather, Pulpwood Petty, he was called that because he worked at the logging place, married a full-blooded Cherokee woman, Tom's grandmother. And that wasn't in America. Can you imagine it? They didn't like that for us.
No, it wasn't.
And people got really upset. And I guess there was something, they were trying to leave, and Tom said something happened, and his grandfather ended up killing a guy. Just like that. And I thought it was Tom said, no, his dad told him that story late in life. But that's quite a story.
Well, again, it ties in, right? Because Pulpwood shows up in US 41 from Mojo. That's, Grandpa's name was Pulpwood. And, without any sort of context to that, you think, well, that's a really odd handle to just kind of pluck out of there. Why would you call your character in this song Pulpwood? It's not even a name. But, well, no, if you know the story, there's a little homage back to Granddad there, right? So,
yeah, I think there's a lot of those that we probably don't know. You're right. Pulpwood, it's an odd name. I didn't understand it for a long time. Because he worked with the logging place, Pulpwood. Oh, Pulpwood Petty.
Yeah.
He also had many earls. His dad was an earl, and his middle name was Earl. And
yeah.
He had 5 Uncle Earls. And I guess his grandmother wouldn't speak the name Earl for some reason. It's really strange.
And so you said, one of the things you said in the book too that I found sort of interesting was that you were taken off guard a little bit with how much you could feel the intensity of his emotions. So, and I wonder, I've thought about that, asking other people. I think I asked John Scott this. Do you think he ever really sort of understood that effect that he had on people? Because Elvis, obviously, it was very visceral and physical, the effect that he had on especially on women. But Tom's effect on people, I don't know whether he obviously could hear the crowd cheering, but that sort of magnetism that you have with another human being sometimes, which you can't really define, you can't predict. Do you think he ever sort of understood that he had that effect on people?
Yeah, because I think he did, because he was liked by everyone. You know, whether it was Roy Orbison or Dylan or George Harrison or the Beatles.
Yeah,
And the royalty of rock and roll, they loved Tom. He didn't love every young rocker like Tom, but
yeah,
he was one of those guys. Because he was real. I think that was it. But
yeah, cool. When you get into the book, like I said, people who don't write songs probably don't grasp how sort of the balance tips one way or another with a sort of a creative decision here or there. If this doesn't work, we'll try this. Oh, and that just takes the song in an entirely different direction. And I think what the book does a brilliant job of is, among other things, is shining a light on that process, but in an interesting way. It's not a dry way. So it really is sort of a music geek book for lay people. And that's how I sort of think of it. There's some pretty technical stuff in there, but you never get bogged down in it. And that approach genuinely helped me shape how I was going to go about my podcast. So I thought, I can go really technical on the musical side, but I probably need to talk about the song and the background to the song and Tom himself and add a little bit of color in, because I don't think anyone's going to want to listen to, listen to those two rhythm parts. They're completely out of phase. And so this means that blah, blah, there's only so far you can go with that. So I really appreciated that I heard your voice through the book as well. So that it took away some of that dryness. So was that a deliberate sort of conscious thing when you were compiling that afterwards to sort of make it flow so that it wasn't all really technical sort of, studio-based stuff?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's actually as much about songwriting, the writing, as, if not more, as the record making.
Yeah.
I really get too technical, but it's a concern I have. I mean, most of my work is interviewing songwriters. I mean, I did a whole book. I just happen to have it here. Over the zebra. Songwriters on songwriting.
Yeah.
And I got Dylan and Simon and early guys like Sammy Kahn and Tom is in this book, a different interview that's from the first time. But that's what that is. It's because, like we were saying, I'm a songwriter, and I really wanted to talk about music as well as how it all goes together. Because, as you know, it's not just the words, it's not just the title or the hook. There's many aspects of a song.
Yeah. And
how they all go together, that balance. That's what it's all about. Simon called it the crucial balance. You can have an amazing melody, but Tom Petty's words, have so much resonance and beauty. But you can have words that great without a great melody. But he always had melodic songs. I mean, his songs were melodic, whether they rocked or not.
Yeah, 100%.
And melody, and yet they were cool melodies. They weren't like schmaltzy melodies, And he just knew simple, like fundamental things. Like I said, how do you know if you got a good melody? And he goes, well, for example, like, can you hum it? If you can't, that's not good. Simple things like that. So he said, sometimes people will come up and they'll go, Tom, you got to hear this new song about it. It's got a chord progression you've never heard. This one chord you've never heard. And Tom will listen to it. He goes, you know why you've never heard that chord? That doesn't sound good at all. Take that chord out. And in other words, it's not for me, fellow musicians, like, to be impressed. It's like, does it sound good or not? And Tom always knew that. He always was able to keep fans in mind. Where I think some rock stars, they just get so engulfed in that they don't even beyond their kingdoms.
Yeah, for sure. And it's sort of that. I've talked about this before on episodes where, when you get that level of songwriter, you can write a great rock song, and it's a straight out, it's not even, we've gone past rock and roll now. There's no roll anymore. It's just a hard rocking song, but then can also write the best pop song you've ever heard with a hook and a great melody that has been played on radio for 30, 40 years. American Girl will be being played 50 years from now, and that's a great rock song, but it's also a great pop song because it's got that hook and it's got that thing it's got that earworm. Yeah, and like you said, you can hum it. You can hum that melody. I've got a friend, my friend I was talking about, who he likes his jazz and he likes a lot of funk. But again, to me, I like watching people play it, but I'm never going to just listen to it because I can't find that hook. I can't find the melody. And maybe it's just I lack the sophistication, but I need something. I need that melody. I need that line that I can hum. I need something to take away, Me
too. They're real songs. So often nowadays I'll hear a hit song and it's an interesting record. It's got a lot of interesting sonics, but is it a song? Tom's a real songs. There's the bridge, there's the intro. there's development, there's the structure, every bit of it is beautifully done.
Yeah.
But so well done that you don't even notice how well written it is. It just seems right. Some other songs, like great songs by like Dylan or John Lennon, I Am the Walrus. It's like, yeah, that's a genius. You can tell, but Tom's not like that. Well, but genius is there, but it's not so overt.
But I mean, I think he still had those arrows in his quiver, right? He just didn't pull them out as often. He just because I think when you mingle them in very sparsely, they have more impact then, right? Because you're not sounding, everything's not sounding the same.
Yeah, when he goes like revel in your abandon, like suddenly there's like this almost Shakespearean right in the middle of rock and roll, but he did it in a way. I don't mean that he was. I think that it's in a way that's greater to do that. You don't want a song to sound like, Dylan or Lennon. They were amazing, but you don't want a song to sound like it. It took a lot of work or was, Tom songs made you feel good, whether they rocked or not. They were right. They just are classic songs. And it's great that when someone does that, but he really kept a focus on it. Some people used to, did that at one time and kind of lost their ability to do it.
Well, it's like you said earlier. There's the genius side of an artist like Tom Petty, but there's also the work and the diligence and the attention to detail, right? It's the same thing, when people talk about Einstein, they always talk about what a genius he was. Well, yeah, Einstein also worked twice as hard as everyone else in his field. And that's as much why he was as brilliant as he was as his natural God-given ability. And it's exactly the same with Petty, because like you said, he was a student of music. He, I love that. There's a story, I think it's in the book, where he's on about, the only thing he wanted for his birthday was to be left alone for as long as he wanted in the record store, because everyone always wants to leave after an hour, and that's not long enough. And so again, that's, just listening to, absorbing music and listening to music and being absolutely obsessed with it.
That was later in life. That wasn't when he was a kid. That was
yeah.
It was an amoeba in Hollywood, but then he got to go back and he told me, I found it. He got like boxes of albums. He bought a library of albums. He just loved music.
Well, and there's something very special about vinyl. My youngest daughter, who's now 15, 2 years ago, asked my wife and I for a turntable, just out of the blue, which is quite tactile. She reads books rather than e-reader. So she got back into vinyl. So I've got back into vinyl now. So I now have my turntable, and I haven't had one for years and years and years. So getting back and listening to, the Heartbreakers albums and some of those mono Bob Dylan records, they just sound different, man. They really do.
Yeah, I just put a new turntable and I moved into this house, and it's nice. I've been listening to it for the first time in a while. So many people's like, yeah, listen to CDs now because I guess we have to, but you can still do that. It's legal. At first I was like, it's going to be so much work, like I did that a million times when I was a kid. I used to live in my LPs. That's all I did was listen to records. I wasn't trying to learn.
But that's the other thing too. There's, as growing up, we didn't have tape cassettes. Tape cassettes came in when I was a kid. I remember getting my first, the huge ass single tape deck brick thing that was heavy as anything. But so we used to listen to vinyl, and I think one of the things that is a little bit different nowadays is people don't listen to, and so a lot of people don't necessarily have to write albums. You write 2 or 3 hit songs, and then some filler, and hopefully there's a couple of decent sort of deep cuts, but it doesn't really matter because no one's listened to the album. Where with vinyl, I sit down, I put on Wildflowers, and I listen to Wildflowers. I put on The Wall, I listen to The Wall. I put on I listen to the whole album, because that's the way you're supposed to listen to this music. You're not supposed to pick and choose, really, right?
I totally agree. I missed that too. And also with LPs, there was Act 1 and Act 2. There was an intermission, you had to turn it over. And so the first song on side 2, that was a big deal. The side 2 was really fun. And that's why Tom, as I'm sure like I guess the first album of his was Full Moon Fever that was on CD, and he made a little announcement. Yes. This is what he normally would get up and turn over the album. It's like, yeah, do that. It's so funny to him.
It's so cool though, right? That's just such a neat little thing to add in. And it again shows his sort of, I think, his playful side and his sense of humor that, just don't take it so seriously,
Yeah, and he was playful, and he was very funny. Anytime we'd meet, he'd always have these funny clothes on. He'd always have a different outfit, and sometimes these weird suits from the 40s, and it'd be like, can you believe someone would even wear this? It would just be to be funny, funny hats and glasses and slippers and stuff. It was cool.
Yeah. Well, there's the famous photo of him with the the glasses with the eyebrows and the mustache. It's kind of like the Groucho thing, but I can't remember which album that's on. I think Long After Dark, maybe. I think it's on the inner sleeve from Long After, or maybe Hard Promises. It's one of those two. So one thing, again, I was going to talk about the style that you took in the book. One thing that I love is the use of italics in the book to emphasize certain words, and it kind of gives you hear it more in Tom's voice than just a written word on the page. And it really brings that voice to life, and you can hear him narrating it. So again, just to get into some sort of process geek stuff, just for myself, really. Maybe we'll even cut this out of the edit, I don't know. But again, was that a deliberate thing where you thought that he said he's put emphasis on that word, so I need to put emphasis on that word?
Absolutely. I mean, that's always the challenge when you do these conversations in print. Yeah. I mean, now I'm using some of the audio you can hear in podcasts or do this, but it was for print. And I really wanted to get the sense of them. I mean, I also would put, anytime there was laughter, whether it just says laughs, just the guy laughs, laughter is where we both laugh. I mean, that's kind of what I meant.
Yeah.
But it makes a difference, when this person's laughing, it changes the whole thing, and
for sure.
And also the italics, and also putting them into paragraphs where they're kind of readable. But I try to make it so you could read it but get a sense of him. It's kind of strange. They did an Audible version of the book recently.
Oh, really?
Yes. And I had nothing to do with it, but they hired this guy, Jim Meskerman, to do both my voice and Tom's voice. But for Tom's voice, he really did a character. He really got into doing Tom. But with mine, it's just flat. So it sounds kind of like a psychiatrist asking, and then was your mother always enjoying you? It's creepy. Most of the stuff was like more humorous.
Oh my God, that's hilarious.
Or why they couldn't maybe get two people to do it.
Yeah.
Since it's two people talking with it.
It's funny you said that, because I was literally, as I was sort of prepping for tonight, I was thinking about that. I was thinking, this is a book that wouldn't work as an audio book, because you would need Tom Petty to read it. And even that would be so weird and awkward for him to read it, because what he's saying to you is off the cuff and it's spontaneous and it's not scripted. So it wouldn't come across the same way twice,
That's right. I mean, I have the recordings of all that, but it wasn't exactly,
Yeah.
As it was. And there was actually, after I finished the whole manuscript, he didn't really want everyone to know it. He went through it and he changed a few things, and that was okay to do.
Yeah.
He didn't really need everyone to know that, but it also showed what a pro he was. He went through every line of the book. Well, I won't name names, but I've done books with people where they didn't even read their own book. They're like, come on, this is your book. Your name is on this, but not Tom. He read every word. And also there's certain things he reconsidered. He told me long stories about how it was tough to be so famous, and he'd go out just to pick up food with Dana in Malibu, and he'd have a hat on and glasses, but someone might see, she would go in, and someone, oh, it's Tom Petty, dude. Yeah. It would turn into a mob scene, and it would get scary.
Yeah.
And that's what happened to John Lennon, and then to George Harrison, who he's very close with. He had good reason to be scared.
Absolutely.
So there was that, yeah.
It's that weird thing too that I think that's but I think that fans sometimes, and I don't think like true fans ever do this, but I think fans sometimes think that they deserve access to the individual, where really all that Tom Petty owes you is exactly what he gave you, is a catalogue of phenomenal songs, great performances, some music videos, these types of things, and then collaborations on books that he was okay with doing. Beyond that, you're owed nothing. You don't.
I agree. He gives more like great quality songs than most people ever get. 40 solid years of great songs, but it became difficult for him at times. Yeah. But at the same time, he didn't cut himself off. Like in his later years, like my son, when he was young, would get autographs of famous people, and Tom would go out and meet the crowds, But the point that I was trying to make was that we had a whole day where we talked about that, a few hours, and so I wrote about it in the book. And he says, "Let's take that out. No one wants to hear me complain about being a rock star." And I thought that was interesting.
Yeah,
he didn't want to made him look like he's complaining. Oh, I'm so rich and famous, and so on. I like that about him.
Well, I always think that's interesting, especially with rock stars, the public persona that they choose to present to the world. And again, I'll go back to Dave Grohl's, famously known as the nicest guy in rock. And you'll get some people who say, well, yeah, he's just putting on an act. But my counter to that sometimes is, okay, but I'd rather someone put on an act of positivity than an act of being an asshole, because we've got plenty of assholes in the world. We need more positive people. And I know that obviously being a positive person wasn't an act for Tom, but again, I think being
I hear you.
being selective about the way you point yourself across, I think that's a cool thing. That's a good thing to do.
Yeah, I think Tom realized that too, and how you're going to be remembered.
Yeah.
And he made a point of, it was about purity. It's sad in the way that you mentioned Dave Grohl, because I remember we saw him at Tom's very last show at the Hollywood Bowl.
Yeah.
Which, of course, we didn't know at the time. But I was with my son, who must have been 18 or so then, and he's like, Dave Grohl, and so we were talking to him as we were walking, and Dave, I just, like all of us, it was just such a great show. We were just buzzing with the excitement. And
yeah.
now it's sad, it was his last show.
But what a way to go out, though, too, right? I mean, if you to go out on that concert, with the shout out to John Scott and so many people who had been part of his life in different ways there in attendance, at least everyone had that to end on, right? Rather than some bleak way of going out,
Absolutely. He went out on top. He finished that tour. He was in terrible pain. Wasn't young doing it. It's the longest tour, I think, of any tour. It was a long tour.
Yeah.
And he finished it. And that last show was, I've seen many shows, and it was like a party.
Yeah.
It almost seemed like he was drunk. Like, is Tom Petty drunk? He was like, but you know how he gets, But
yeah.
He was in such a good mood. And I got to take photos just for the first few songs in the, it was at the Hollywood Bowl at the orchestra pit right under the stage.
Nice. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and most of the photographers and the press came the first night. He did 3 nights. But my son and I wanted to be at the last show. It's good that we were. So there was one other guy maybe in the pit with me. So Tom saw me, and he came right over, and he stood right in front of me. And I was so startled, I didn't focus. I didn't get in focus first shot, but he must have come 4 times, and then gave me the shot.
So
cool, in the new version of my book, I have one of those shots, and he just was grinning. He looked so happy. It was during his first time. But Dana saw those pictures, and she said, he knew it was you, and he kept coming back. But it's like a photographer's dream. They stood right in front of me and just still playing this guitar. I think Mike Campbell was probably soloing at the time or something.
But I think, again, it speaks to his character, and his sort of his warmth of generosity. It's the same thing with reforming Mudcrutch. Tom Petty doesn't need to go and do that. He doesn't need to reform an old band with his old friends and go play 500 seaters because he's Tom Petty. He can fill stadiums. You don't need to do that. But that sort of, again, that authenticity about everything that he did and his generosity to his friends and the people close to him, it comes through pretty much everything he does. And there's story after story after story like that, I think, right?
Yeah, and there's stories that people don't know, too. It's stories that are coming out.
Yeah.
I guess Roger McGuinn's great guitar was stolen. Did you hear about that? His great 12-string Rickenbacker?
No.
And Tom says Rickenbacker, not Rickenbacker, Rickenbacker.
Yeah.
It was stolen. It's 12-string that gave that great bird sound, and it was on the black market. It must have been like $60,000 or so. And Tom secretly bought it and gave it to him for Christmas. But he didn't want anyone to know. I mean, who does that?
Yeah, that's just incredible. And the same thing with Oh no, I was just going to say. I mean, it's again when you're at that level of stardom, for whatever that means, and you're such a talent, you could forgive someone for getting carried away with themselves, I think. But it just seems that he didn't have that gene. He never had that sort of that swaggery sort of arrogant, I'm Tom Petty, fuck you. He just didn't. It didn't exist from everything I've read and everyone I've spoken to about him.
It's true. Even when he was young, he wasn't doing it just to get the chicks. He was wanting to play music. Yeah. He liked getting pretty girls, but it was about the music more than anything,
Yeah.
It was always that way, and it was pure. He learned early on, we should do this with purity. And the records he liked from early blues, rock and roll, real-time rock and roll musicians playing together, good songs, good songwriting.
Yep.
He took the whole thing very seriously, and rock and roll itself seriously. And he was upset, like, the last DJ when he saw it getting diluted. It meant a lot to him. It changed his life. He saw it obviously as for him alone, it changed his life in such a profound way. But it meant everything. But that's why he was always so connected with his fans, because rock and roll changed his world in such a big way. He was able to realize his dreams. And it's funny, when he started to do them, his mother she couldn't even accept it. He made $100, like, because when he was first playing with his early bands in Gainesville, he made $100. And his mother found it in his pants and said, "What is this? He said, I made that thing, and she would not believe it. She had to call the club and find out if
Yeah.
it was true. She couldn't accept. He made $100. That was a lot of money.
Yeah,
To me, that,
absolutely.
and she goes, Tommy, you never had lessons. You know, how did you, even how he could write songs? It just, you know, his dad kind of accepted it, but his mother just kind of, it was just hard to believe.
Yeah. Hey, man, it
But,
was a
you
lot.
know, he was a lot of talent as well.
There was a lot of money
So,
back then. It's a lot of money these days for live acts in some cases. Like, the live music industry is not doing well. So,
right. Not many great bands, and they were a real band.
yeah, for sure. And there's nothing like seeing a real band, even if you don't know them, going into just randomly going into a bar on a Saturday night and saying, "Holy shit, who are these guys? This is fantastic." It just, and the same thing, like you said, you know, you said earlier on that when you listened to music, you knew that rock and roll was for you. And I remember viscerally listening to Black Dog, putting on side one of Z4 and thinking, "Whoa, this is for me. This is the music I want to listen to. I don't know what this is, but this is what I want to listen to." And just being taken away from it, taken away by it, you know.
Yeah, I was just feeling that watching, you know, the new version of Let It Be, Get Back,
Oh,
watching that many times, especially where they're playing on the roof, and just remember how exciting it is. And there's just four of them. I mean, they got Billy Preston too, but
yeah.
wow, the songwriting it's exciting. You know, that's what
Yeah.
jazzed Tom up. You know, I mean, he was so electrified by that, and you know that was, and they were electrified by early rock and roll, obviously, and
Yeah.
that's what it was all about. That true thing. I mean, the Beatles played together even when they're making, you know, Abbey Road. They started with them playing in the studio together.
I think Tom said that at some point, right? He said that that's when he realized that, oh, you just need to find some of your friends, get your instruments out and play, and you can be a band. Okay, well, that sort of, I can relate to that. Can't relate to, you know, Sinatra or some of those guys, but I can relate to that.
Oh,
That
yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah, he loved it. You know, when he saw the Beatles, they were self-contained. They didn't need any other musicians, and they're so cool, and they're friends, and they're writing their own songs, doing
Yeah.
everything. That's always what he wanted to be. More, you know, he never wanted to be a solo artist.
No, for sure. So, you know, obviously, you write the book, and I think it came out, was the original version 2005? Do I have that right?
That's right. Yeah.
And then the re-release was 2019, I think, and which is the one, the extended edition, which I have here. Which, watching this video, anyone, you should go buy this immediately if you don't have it already.
Thank you. You know, we did that because the first one actually went out of print. People bought every one, you know, after he died. And they were selling him for so much money on the internet. It was crazy. And,
Yeah.
so, you know, he and I shared the copyright, so I needed Dana's permission to do a new version, and the publisher wanted to. So
Yeah.
it's so great. So she not only said yes, but she wrote. We did a little interview for the new version that she's in, talking about Tom.
Yeah.
And you know, from her point of view, it's beautiful too. And talking about what a sweet guy he was. You know, another great example of that is when he was talking about Howie Epstein, who he loved, the bass player he stole from Del Shanno's band.
Yep.
He got really messed up on heroin. It was really hard for Tom, and Tom told me about it. And the first time he told me about it, he was so dark. It was so sad. We're talking about his emotions, you know, being felt. When he was happy, I felt, you know, but when he was sad, and that was the saddest of all.
Yeah.
And after that, he felt really bad. And according to Dana, he came out and he said, all I did was talk about how sad, you know, how he was and his drugs. And
yeah,
I felt terrible. I didn't say anything nice about him. And Dana said, well, call Paul and tell him that. And he goes, I guess I could do that. As if I said, oh, we've done that, Tom, you know. And he was so sweet. You know, he could have just said, we have to do that over. But he goes, would you mind? I mean, I know we spent a whole day, but I just didn't get it right. Would you mind? You know, what a sweet guy. He could do that. But it also showed to me he wanted to get it right for Howie. I mean, that's what meant the most to him. Like, it's Howie, and he wanted to say good things about him, and it was so dark. And it showed me what a good guy he was. Like, this is the book, and people are going to remember this. And Howie was a good guy. He loved Howie. Yeah. And he felt really bad about what happened.
Well, just a sensational musician, all around, a great producer, brilliant, great on him. Wasn't even a bass player, really. He was a guitarist, right? And sort of, well, I'll play bass then. And the best sort of vocal foil for Tom. I mean, Scott Thurston, I absolutely adore, and he's a phenomenal vocalist too. Stan was a great vocalist, but Howie, they just matched. That was a pair that was supposed to sing together, right?
Yeah. And that was what got him in the band. He said there are a lot of great bass players, but his singing. And he goes, and then the heartbreak, you got to sing your part perfectly on stage every time. It's not like Keith Richards kind of, you know, we try to get it, you know, not on the Heartbreaker. You got to get it. And Howie is a great singer.
Yeah, really great.
And you're right, a great producer. He did a John Prine album that won a Grammy.
It's my favorite. That's my favorite John Prine album. Yeah.
Isn't it? How cool.
Absolutely, yeah.
I like that.
Well, I think he broke through in Chicago, right? That's being a Chicago boy.
I know. He was a local hero, and I knew him quite well. It was very sad. He died when lockdown started. That was so sad.
I was absolutely, again, another artist I didn't get to see live, and I same thing. And it's one of those things, I think, that when that happens, you think, you know what, I'm not going to make that mistake anymore. I need to go start seeing these guys and making more of an effort to go and see these people who I really want to see, because you never know. You just don't know if they're going to be there tomorrow, right?
John Prine, when he started, he was one of the guys in Chicago. It's like,
yeah.
But he came out with those masterpiece songs from right from the start.
That first album.
Who does that? You're right. Just amazing songs on your first album. I mean, it was a challenge for him because he had to match that for the rest of his career. That was hard.
Yeah,
amazing.
Sure. Did you ever speak to him?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
You can find my John Prine interview online, but
I'll have to find that one. Yeah.
But yeah, because I knew the people. I grew up in those clubs.
Yeah.
Steve Goodman really helped him get his start. Helped him get his record contract. Someone I knew and gave me a little songwriting lesson. So I was, that's where I grew up. I just love those guys. I was much younger, but when they emerged together in John Prine, it's like, wow, songwriting. I was writing like Imitation Beatle, Simon and Garfunkel, surreal lyrics. Then I was about 12 or so. And Steve Goodman was like, he heard one of my songs. He goes, that's good, but I could have probably said that in 2 lines, that whole song. There's John Prine where it's poetic, but it really says something. And that was a challenge, but it was good for me because So John Prine and all the Chicago songwriters. That was a very fertile place. I started playing in those clubs when I was young.
Yeah. When I came to, again, another artist who I came to, being from England and growing up in England, I didn't grow up with sort of, Americana and American folk and those types of things. Dylan, my dad was into, so I didn't know any of those guys, Jim Croce or Croce, I don't know how it's pronounced, and John Prine, and even sort of getting into some of the country stuff. That all happened for me sort of within the last 10 to 15 years of being in Canada. And again, it's that thing of like, why did I not know about any of this? Like, oh my God, this would have totally influenced the way I write songs if I'd known about you. You don't have to, maybe you don't even need a bridge. Maybe like Roy Orbison messed around with structures of songs all the time.
He really did more than anyone. His songs were trippy.
I mean, 4 verses and no chorus. Like, okay, well, I guess you can do that then because it works if you're good enough. So,
right. But John Prine, I mean, he was special, and I just remember when he emerged, it was kind of mind blowing. I said, wow, this is different, But for years he wasn't well known. I mean, he was a local hero in Chicago, and I never knew he would become as well known as he did. And sadly, in the music industry, nothing better for your reputation than when you die. He's won so many awards since then. I know his wife Fiona is great, and his kids. We did a thing together at the Grammy Museum that's on YouTube where I interview him live.
Okay.
And talk about humble. He's the most humble of anyone.
I'm gonna make a note.
And different. Tom was diligent and made a point of it. John Prine was lazy. He goes, anytime I'm writing a song, someone wants a hot dog, I get the hot dog. He didn't write songs for years, but Tom never did that. But it wasn't because he was a pro. He loved it. Even when he'd go on vacation, he wanted to write songs, but he loved it more than anything.
Well, as a songwriter yourself, you know that you can't turn it off. Now, not everyone has as free-flowing a tap as Tom Petty did, but you can't turn that off. If they come, and when they come, you've got to do something with them. You've got to sit down and you've got to write something. Otherwise, you'd go crazy, right?
Yeah, if you turn them off, you can kill yourself or turn it into a different kind of person.
Never understand people. Sometimes you'll talk to people, oh, you still playing? No, I don't play drums anymore. Really? What do you mean you don't play anymore? Oh, what you got there?
If you're playing, you're a musician.
What's that guitar? What kind of guitar is that?
That's an SG.
It's a blue. Is it blue?
It's black. Does it look?
It's black. It kind of had a little bit of blue just because of the light.
The lighting is a little understated.
Oh, nice. It's not the way Angus Young plays it.
Who? Angus?
Angus is not the way Angus plays it. So you were talking about Dana earlier, and we've kind of mentioned her a couple of times. It always strikes me that after Dana comes into Tom's life, the songs change a little bit, and there's still, when he needs to access a little bit of fury, that's still there. But it feels like, especially when I listen to Mojo, That's just a free, loose, happy songwriter going in. You know what I mean? And I think just interviews, like you said, Dana telling him to call you and sort of encouraging him to just be, be himself and be free to sort of express himself. Do you ever get that sense that there was a sort of a seismic shift in his temperament when she sort of started loving him? Basically, I guess is really what happened, right? So,
absolutely, a huge seismic shift. That's a good way of putting it. And I've written about it in the intro to the new one.
Yeah.
But as I mentioned, I saw him, right after the divorce, and when he was living in the chicken shack when he was single, and he was sad, going through stuff. And but it was different when we were doing the book. He was living in Malibu with Dana, and he was a happy man, and he was truly in love. It was real love, and she's a beautiful person, but such a sweet soul too. And Tom loved that about her. He'd say, she never says anything bad about anyone. She's just so supportive and just one of those people.
Yeah.
But a beautiful person and a true Tom Petty fan. I mean, they met because she was such a fan. She was going to his shows, and would meet him afterwards. And he wrote Angel Dream the first night they met, though they didn't get together for 5 years after that.
Isn't that crazy?
But she helped integrate. I mean, we're talking about that he wasn't necessarily an easygoing guy. He would not listen to his old albums because all he heard was the imperfections or the bad memories that were associated. And she put on one, and he goes, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't listen to those here." And she goes, "Well, I'm sorry, I'm a huge Tom Petty fan, so deal with it." And she told me, so I listened to it. And, you know what? It wasn't so bad. Yeah, we knew that time. He was surprised, and so, and also for this book, because I would come in knowing the song so well.
Yeah.
He said, "Tell me what?" Like after what he goes, "Next time, tell me." Are we cool?
Yeah.
I mean, because next time, tell me what songs you want to do in advance, and I'll do my homework. He wanted to be prepared. And I lost my thread. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. No, but it's that there's a part in the book where we're talking about. I think it's Refugees talking about, and Mike Campbell obviously wrote most of the music or the sort of the general frame of that song. And Tom says, "Oh, I was just really happy to be able to play on that song." Like, what? You're Tom Petty. Like, you wrote one of the best rock lyrics of all time on top of this song. Like, again, just have that sort of keep coming back to the word humility. I think that it just comes through in spades all through your book and through all the interviews and everything else, right?
Right. At the same time, he doesn't want to underplay his. I think to me, he didn't put it that way because he took Refugee and turned it into what it was. And some people often, I mean, Mike gave him great stuff, but there's so much of it.
Yeah.
And Tom said often that he didn't talk about it, but he would sometimes cut him up or change him around. That wasn't exactly as Mike had him.
Yeah.
And so there were many great ones he passed on, but the one because Tom would spend a long time to get him right. But Refugee came fast. That was one that he did get that really fast. And he also said about that was really what he knew. Jimmy Iovine was a real great producer because he really made a great record of it. Tom was really excited the record that Jimmy made of that. And I agree. It's a great sounding record. Great song. It's a wonderful song.
Yeah. And like I said, the album as a whole, the sonic sort of quality of that album and what Jimmy Iovine did with that, it did change the direction that rock music went in to an extent, right? I mean, like those big thundering drums wasn't really a thing until he did that. And Tom said that he wasn't always a fan of it. And I think that bringing, Rick Rubin definitely, to my mind, produced the best sounding of the sort of, the three. I always think of like Jimmy Iovine trilogy, even though I know that Southern Accents was an Iovine album. It kind of isn't at the same time. And then you've got the Rick Rubin three, and then you've got sort of, the last three. And I always think of them in those threes, and then the ones in between. But that one just sounds so freaking different to anything else that was around at the time.
Consider Full Moon Fever, the stuff you did with Jeff Lynne, part of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think of it in periods, also in periods. So there's the early period, which I think of sort of up to Let Me Up, I've Had Enough, but not Southern Accents, which I think fits more into the middle period. And then the middle period goes till about songs from She's the One, and Echo as well. And then everything after that, I think, is late period. That's the way I always sort of frame it in my mind.
To me, there's such a huge change in sound and the writing too.
Yeah.
He started with Jeff Lynne. And then, the album after that, Into the Great Wide Open.
Yeah.
The first one, Full Moon Fever, was a solo album, but the second, and the band wasn't crazy, but they weren't on it.
Yeah.
But The second one was with Jeff Lynne and the band. And I think it's a great album. But Tom said he loved working with Jeff. And Jeff was, he said, the first person that showed him that it could be fun recording, that he didn't have to start over. And Rick helped him with that too. And also his digital recording helped. They didn't have to make a cassette and then start completely over. Which was, the problem. That's why he smashed his hand, because he couldn't get the record to sound like the demo, that he got at home. And that was so much better for him. So I found it was really then that his singing got better and his songwriting just seemed a little more joyful at times and less intense, and but especially the vocals, some of those early vocals, they sound kind of tortured at times. Like that's intense, but he's younger too. But then he gets such rich, resonant vocals in his later years, and he, as he said, he very rarely used even any echo. I mean, some echo, but very like little reverb. It was almost flat, so you really hear the words. And that was partially Jeff, but also with Jeff Lynne, they wrote all those songs. He just loved, like Jeff showed him recording could be fun, and they wrote all those songs in one night for Full Moon Fever, and then recorded them because Jeff wanted to go back to. But Tom really said Jeff Lynne changed his life. He really said. And when Jeff Lynne got a star on the Walk of Fame, he said he thought he was the greatest producer he knew and also the greatest musician.
Well, Jeff Lynne has the resume to back that up, I think, right?
It's not like all the time. They don't like that, the different sound necessarily. It's funny how people are. But Tom integrated all of that, and I know the Heartbreakers had a hard time about doing, but Tom stepping away from the band. But like that last night, they played all those songs, at the end, that whole tour. Those were all Heartbreaker songs, ultimately. Even, it started when he did work with Dave Stewart and Don't Come Around Here No More.
Yeah.
That started, as just a 4-track with a drum machine that Dave had. And I've worked with Dave too on the book. And, but then he brought in the Heartbreakers at the end, just to include them. But that started like when they weren't the kind of thing like, oh, you're doing, you're exploring other musicians. Great, Tom, go for it. With good reason, they didn't want to be replaced.
Oh, for sure. And like you said, I mean, around the time of Full Moon Fever, there was also the Wilburys, like you said, and then Jeff comes back in. So you could see that sort of not really resentment, but like that uncertainty about, well, are we still a going concern? But of course, he just wanted to be in a band, though. He just wanted to be in a band with people he trusted, right? And he was never going to leave Mike Campbell, for God's sakes. That would be ridiculous.
No, and the Wilburys were never to make a lot of money or to have a hit. It was just pure fun. He talked about that. He's so happy. Dad and Dana were the happiest. He just had so much fun because there's only so many people he could look up to.
Yeah.
Especially Bob Dylan, Roy Orbison, and Jeff Lynne.
Yeah.
And who am I leaving on? George Harrison.
Yeah, that guy. Just George Harrison,
And George meant so much to him. I mean, that was another thing about Tom. He would become close friends with George Harrison, but they became very close friends. I mean, very close.
Yeah, for sure.
And George said, like, the first time they really got to know each other, he goes, "No, you're in my life now. I'm not going to let you out." He said at the time. And that meant a lot to Tom.
Well, no, I think, you have to be a good person to attract good people into your sort of sphere of friends, right? You don't, if you're an asshole, you need to be a good hang. That's the thing in the music industry and in a lot of places. If you're hard to work with, people won't want to work with you and they won't want to be around you. Well, everyone wanted to work with Tom, and a lot of people did. A lot of people got their wish because he was so generous with his creative time, right?
Right, and he respected talent. When Stevie Nicks wanted to join the band, and he didn't want to join the band, but he loved working with her. He loved when she would sing on the inside of her. But absolutely.
Right on. So, were there any? Excuse me. Sorry. Obviously, there were 2 albums that you didn't get to talk to Tom about, Mojo and Hypnotic Eyes. I think everything. It was up to Last DJ, right? I think that was the last album in there. So,
more than 2.
Well, I think the 2 and then Mud Crutch 2 might have been. Yeah, right. I think.
Yeah, I saw that Mud Crutch.
So, were there any songs from, if you think of like Echo and Mojo and Hypnotic Eye, are there any questions that you'd love to have asked him about any of those songs or the process on those 2 albums? Because obviously Mojo, they went into the clubhouse and recorded it there, right? They didn't go into a studio; they just recorded it in the clubhouse, and it was essentially live off the floor. So that would have been a great, some great conversations to talk about some of those songs there, right?
Yeah. Well, most of his stuff started like that. They were really the guys all playing together. We could work out the arrangement first. Like Tom had this thing, like if there's going to be a riff in the song, play it while you're recording. You don't add the riff, like in the recording after. purity thing again.
Yeah.
But Hypnotic Eye, especially, like I thought that was really sophisticated writing. I mean, that's his last record, and like I mentioned, American Dream Part B. That's a really dejected person. I mean, the American dream was that you're going to do better than your parents, and every generation is going to be even better. And hasn't worked out that way. And Tom, he was really astute at seeing those changes. He saw the change in the music industry pretty much before other people. The one thing he didn't see was that how the internet could destroy the music business, because he was giving away free downloads at first. I think it was when we were starting the book that the internet was kind of starting. And I said, don't you ever worry that could just replace it? He goes, well, I don't think that would ever happen. He was wrong.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. Used to be the people nominated for best song for Grammy. They were usually great songs, and it changed. Like 8 people wrote the song, and they were cultural events off, like a Beyonce song or something. But Tom never shifted. That was a cool thing. He never kind of, even once, kind of. I mean, they were on MTV, and maybe there's one song that had synthesizer on it, but he was always about rock and roll and keeping it pure.
Yeah.
I mean, he was changing. He wasn't like using old stuff. He was always innovating. But in terms of those last 2 albums, those are. I would just want to talk to him about where he was, because that's a very dark song. And I mean, like we're saying, DJ also was quite dark, but that's a very dark album in so many ways.
For sure it is, yeah. But then, and you also get there's some brightness on there too, right? So you get that, and I think he always did that. He always had that balance between black and white. What's that, sorry?
Yeah. The song "I Get High" is that it?
I think that one's on there, yeah.
Upbeat song. Where was that previous? But yeah, there's always those. I mean, Tom, like, he said, you don't want it to be too heavy. He goes, but you don't want it to be lightweight either. I mean, you didn't want to write ditties,
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, but no, it's, like I said, I mean, Shadow People's on there, Power Drunk's on there. There's some Fault Lines is on there. Like I said, there's some serious weight to that album.
Yeah. What else? What else is on that album? Can you tell me what are the others?
Let's have a look. So it's American Dream Plan B, Fault Lines, Red River, Full Grown Boy. I mean, straight out the gate, that's 4 fantastic songs. All You Can Carry, brilliant track. Power Drunk, one of my favorites. Forgotten Man, which was a live staple for years after that, right? Sins of My Youth, You Get Me High, Burnt Out Town, Shadow People, and then Playing Dumb is on the vinyl album. But yeah, so it's
You Get Me High. That was such an live. That's so anthemic. It was such a simple song. And just a perfect song, and it doesn't kind of get mentioned much. But he played that live quite often. It was one of those like, wow, yeah, this is another one of those. Yeah, so many of his songs, I thought if they would have released them as singles, would have been hit singles.
100%.
Every song they released that was on MTV, every single one became a hit single. As soon as people heard him, in an MTV, they'd heard him over and over. But he didn't have one that failed, because his songs were so great. There's so many more I think that could have been hits.
Well, I think it always blows my mind that we're only 2 singles off Hard Promises. They released The Waiting and A Woman in Love, and nothing else.
Is that right?
Something big could have been released off that album. King's Road probably could have been a single. That's a great upbeat rock. There's singles, like you said. So I always wonder about that too. Like who chooses the singles? I think early in an artist's career, the label does have a lot of say in that, right? They'll say, no, this is the one we're releasing. But once you get to a certain stage, you think that Tom Petty's saying, no, this is the first single, this is the next one. So I kind of wonder where you would think.
You'd think. I mean, often he was upset. Like there's certain, like a ballad couldn't be released. You couldn't put Southern Accents as a single, or The Insider, too slow. That was the thinking. So sometimes he didn't like the choices.
Yeah.
But when he brought in Full Moon Fever to the record company, they rejected it. They said they didn't hear it hit.
I know.
Yeah, that level of it. So even with Tom Petty, he had to deal with that, and it really bummed him out. I mean, he had to go back. Ultimately, it did come out, but it was months, and it really upset him. They said they didn't hear a hit. It had 5 hits on it.
I mean, it doesn't. The songs that sort of at least 3 of the songs that define Tom Petty and the sort of public consciousness are on that album.
Well, I mean, Free Falling, the most famous song ever, is on that. They didn't hear a hit. Come on.
Yeah, I Won't Back Down.
And this has a track record. They should have trusted him. But to me, it was a unanimous. I mean, there are many people unanimous. Not one guy said, yeah. And he told me then they went to a party, and Lenny Waronker, the ex-president of the Warner Brothers, was there, and he was with Jeff Lynne. They were bummed out because they rejected the album, and we got 4 great songs. And then he said, "Can I hear them?" And they didn't have the album, but they said, "Well, we'll play one." They played him Free Fall, and Lenny goes, "That's a hit." I mean, just for hearing them playing, he knew. Yeah. Lenny knew. But the new guys that came in, they weren't they weren't musicians. They didn't know music in the same way. They were marketing guys. So.
Yeah, for sure.
That was the problem. It was different. It had a different sound than Tom's previous albums. So
yeah.
This doesn't sound the same. This could be a problem.
Listen to the damn songs. It's the same thing with the first album, right? I was talking to John Scott about that. He says, how do you listen to that album and get to Breakdown, which is the second song? I mean, the first, the first track, which has completely escaped my mind now, isn't my favorite Tom Petty song. So I could sort of see you've got the leather jacket and the bullets, and you get that first track, and you might think, well, okay, that's not exactly what I think. But as soon as you hear Breakdown, surely to God, you think, oh, actually, no, this guy's. And then when you get to American Girl, how do you not see that? Your job is to recognize talent, and you don't see that? Are you kidding me? It's insane.
It's not uncommon. I know a critic here who told me, like, in 50 years, Tom Petty won't be remembered. I go, are you kidding? He goes, name one song. It's good. I go, Free Fall. He goes, not a good song.
Okay.
Tom has so many famous songs.
Yeah.
But I also know a radio guy here who, at one of after Tom's death, they had a celebration of him. And he kind of said proudly to me, I never played Tom on the radio, not once. And I go, really? Because you couldn't hear one Tom Petty song you thought was good for radio? Really? Wow. He was proud of it. But he was on a college radio station that was hip. But even that's not hip. He played Tom Petty for 40 years. Come on. He's still proud of it.
Now, that's people trying to be edgy, right? That's just people trying to be edgy. No, I'm too cool for Tom Petty. Well, more fool you then,
Right. And then, there was a lot of those critics' favorites of musicians who regular people don't really like that much, but they're always talking about. But people love Tom Petty. I mean, you couldn't deny that. After, a while, they must have caught on, you would think. But
you would have thought so. And again, I mean, Full Moon Fever comes at a time in the band's career where they're not exactly fading. They're touring regularly, and they're hitting big concerts in big venues. So again, why don't you just trust this guy? And you've got Jeff Lynne involved as well, who again has a track record and is a pretty great producer. I mean, I think he'd just done Cloud 9 with George Harrison. It's not like he doesn't have a pedigree. Where's the problem here, people?
Tom's album was finished before Cloud 9, but came out afterwards.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Okay.
Yeah, I learned that from the interview. I didn't know that either because it didn't seem that way. But and also, George was so happy with Cloud 9. It was his first hit in a long time, and that made Tom happy. George would come to LA and they'd have the greatest time together. They just loved each other. It was really sweet.
Yeah.
But that time. So that's why I was a little surprised you didn't mention Jeff in terms of his producers, because he had a big impact on Tom and brought a lot of joy into Tom's life.
Oh yeah, sorry. I mean, I think probably in terms of the producers, I think of like 3 sets of albums, and it's because it's back to back, right? Where Jeff kind of came in for Full Moon Fever and then did then did Into the Great Wide Open and then did Highway Companion, but they were spread apart, right? They were a little bit more. There was a little bit more gap between them.
What's the Great Wide Open? But yeah, Highway Companion was later.
Yeah,
that's when I was doing the book. They were doing that. And that has a different sound. It doesn't sound
totally
like
different.
And it's cool, it's sparser. I love that album.
Yeah,
that album makes me so happy because that's what he was working on when we were doing the book, and he was making it there in the studio at his home where we'd meet. So he'd play me the songs. He'd go, listen to this.
Oh, and no way.
Yeah, and as you probably know, he's pretty deaf, so he would play me them super loud. I mean, it'd be so exciting. Like turn that car around. That was the first one I heard.
Oh,
and then he went on vacation with Dana, and he finished Down South, which I just think is a masterpiece. It's like, it's funny, but it's just brilliant in every way. And he was so proud of Down South.
Yeah.
He said after finishing Down South, he goes, that's the kind of song that makes you want to do it again. He just loves songs that make him. And also Round the Roses. He finished Down South and Around the Roses on vacation with Dana. Dana wanted a vacation. And Tom said, okay, I'm not even going to bring a guitar. So after the second day, he asked the hotel to get him a guitar. And Dana's like,
yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite Tom Petty songs is off that. Well, 2 of my favorite Tom Petty songs, "Saving Grace," which is again just a superb guitar riff, and then "Big Weekend," which is just the most fun. You know what I mean? That's like just that very free.
I never mentioned Big Weekend. You're right.
Yeah, it's a driving song. It's a driving song. It's a summer song. It's just a fun.
Yeah.
And lives lives in a brick house painted white and brown. Those little lyrical details that you think, God damn it, I wish I could have written that. And it's a real sort of it's almost a throwaway, but it makes that picture of that house so much more evocative.
Absolutely. His later songs had a lot of those funny details. Playful with lyrics and he had a tattoo too, you know, those kind of like funny
Yep.
lines, and just having fun, you know, with the writing.
Absolutely.
But it always worked. It was well crafted. It wasn't sloppy. Yeah, there are a lot of those funny details.
Yeah, I love, and like I said, getting into the podcast and trying to do this is really deepened my appreciation for those songs because you just hear so much more in them. And I wanted to ask you, so after you've gone through the catalog with Tom and you've sort of got all the information now and you've got the material to write the book, how much did that change your appreciation for his music as well as him as a person, but more the music? How did it change it in specific ways, or did it just sort of give you that deeper love of the music?
There were a lot of songs I got to know better, and even songs that were considered throwaways or, you know, ones that aren't famous.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of them I already knew, but so many of his songs were great. I was just so impressed by his songwriting. The first time I interviewed him, I mentioned Two Gunslingers, which is on Into the Great Wide Open. It's a song about the Old West, but it's an existential song where the gunslingers are questioning their job. Like,
yes,
you know, I'm going to take control of my, you know, it's not a job you can really sustain too long. And I mentioned that song to him, and he was so happy because no one ever mentions that song, and it's such a cool song. And there's so many like that, you know.
Yeah.
And like Insider is such a special song, but there's so many. You know, they're deep cuts, but they're not obscure, strange songs. They're amazing songs.
Yeah.
And they couldn't singles, most likely, because some of them are too odd. Though I think Two Gunslingers might have been a single. But they're just such great songs, so beautifully, you know, realized. You know, he would really, he never took any songs lightly. You know, he had what he called his A songs and his B songs. And his B songs were ones where not every part was up to, you know, they weren't good enough, and those wouldn't get on the albums. And that's unusual. You know, other people, they only have B songs, maybe if that. You know, it's like, come on, whatever. You know, they're gonna make the album. But
absolutely. Well, it's genuinely. I mean, you know, obviously I'm a huge Tom Petty fan, but I think objectively, if you think about the quality of the songwriting, the quality of the musicianship and the arrangement and the production, most bands aren't anywhere near the stuff that was released on playback or on the anthologies, where they were never released because Tom obviously didn't think that they didn't make the cut, they didn't make the grade, and they're better than most bands' greatest hits. Genuinely, I mean, I do genuinely think that. You know, it's not just I'm not just pandering. I think that's definitely true.
I agree. Even like we were mentioning the Mudcrutch album. Not only did he play with them, but he wrote great songs for that album. I mean, those songs are great.
Absolutely.
Just anything. I mean, he always did that. He loved writing songs, but he'd always give it his full thing. You know, he was never lazy when it came to songwriting. But he just had a great knack for it too. I mean, he was
for sure.
Songwriting. So often I'd hear one of his songs, it's like, yeah, that's good, and then it just gets you in a way, you know. And there's more to it than you know, and there's a depth, and the music helps you understand the words, and it all comes together in such a beautiful way. It's remarkable.
And it's all very deliberate too, right? And that's the other thing of it is, you know, that it's deliberate. You know that it's actually been designed that way. That that's not happened by accident. Well, sometimes you'll get happy accidents in the studio, but it's been written that way. It's actually been written that way, and it's been put together very specifically because that's the way it needs to happen. And again, that attention to detail that he had, and the work ethic, and the sort of dedication to, well, I'm not going to put out crap to my fans because I love my fans. I'm only going to give them the absolute best thing that I can do. And I think he sustained that for an entire career, like, you know, 40-year recording career, which again, most people don't sustain that for 5. Well, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about some of your music, because I'd love to expose my listeners to the stuff that you've put out there, because I've been listening to it a little bit lately, and there's a few questions that I had for you about that, because I think that they're really, especially like Orange Avenue, they're very different albums for certainly, and Orange Avenue's very eclectic, I think, and very interesting. And at times I feel a bit of Cat Stevens in there, and sometimes a British band called Supergrass, with the way that some of the horns are arranged, and that you get some Stones or Bowie or Sting, or you get all these different influences coming in, and you get this hodgepodge. But there's a really consistent, strong through line, because you've got such a distinct, unique voice that it only really actually sounds like Paul Zollo. So I wanted to ask you, with that first batch of songs for that album, for the first solo album, did you write a set of songs for an album, or were those songs that had been sort of kicking around a little while and you decided, okay, I've actually got enough songs now, I'm going to sit down and try and finish these and get them into something that sounds somewhat coherent and record an album? What was the process for that?
Well, prior to recording that album, I'd been playing with a band in LA, because when I came to LA, I was kind of a folky, like John Prine, playing those kind of folk. But there's hardly any acoustic places you could do that in LA. So I got together a band called the Ghosters, and I made an album with them first. But I was always writing a lot of songs.
Right.
So it wasn't that I wrote songs for an album ever. It was which ones to put on, and is that too many? It was like,
Yeah.
Especially with Orange Avenue, both of them. There was kind of the tendency or the hope to like make them Sergeant Pepper or something, just to do everything. Especially back then, we were actually in recording studios, analog, multi-track, and to me, there's nothing more exciting. I became a journalist when I came to LA. But my dad didn't like that word. He thought, journalists write about war and stuff, not about music. But I never wanted to write about music. I didn't study journalism. I studied song. I want to always be a songwriter, and that it's always been my thing. I was writing songs all through, and my songs have been informed by the journey. But in some ways, it took me away from that, away from my band. So Orange Avenue, there are a lot of songs I wanted to record, and now I think there's some odd choices when I hear it now. But I'm recording I have so many songs. I've been doing a lot of co-writing too, and I'm just so eager to. I've just recently started recording new ones.
Oh, nice. So there's going to be another album?
Oh, yes, there's much more to come.
Fantastic. Okay, that was my conversation with Paul Zollo that I recorded a few weeks ago. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I found Paul to be wonderfully warm and friendly, and of course, very, very articulate and intelligent about Tom's music. He's also a fantastic musician in his own right, and we did talk a little bit about his music. I would have loved to talk a little bit more about his music, to be honest. But it is a Tom Petty project podcast. So, but go check out his albums, Orange Avenue and Universal Cure, which are on all your streaming platforms, Spotify, Apple Music, those kinds of things. He's got a very unique voice and he's an excellent songwriter and a craftsman and a great musician. And I think you'll enjoy a lot of the stuff that he's put out there. Again, before I wrap things up completely, just a reminder that the humanitarian efforts in the Ukraine are critically important to the people who live there. And I would urge you, if you can, go check out the link in the episode notes and please donate to the Red Cross or Relief Fund or any of the other great funds that are going on and to get resources and supplies and, just to get people out of there or get them safe or get them the things that they need. So if you can do that, that would be appreciated, I'm sure, by the Ukrainian people. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook and Instagram at The Tom Petty Project and on Twitter at Tom Petty Project. And of course, you can find me on YouTube. So go follow, like, subscribe, whichever is applicable on those platforms. And again, please leave a review or a rating if you haven't done that already. It does help and I appreciate it. I love talking to you on social media, so get a hold of me. It's been great so far in terms of sort of getting people onto the podcast for a sort of fan guest, because people have been approaching me and I haven't had to really ask too many people to say, "Oh, will you come on the podcast?" And I found this: everyone you ask to talk about Tom Petty, if they love Tom Petty, they want to talk about Tom Petty. So it's really not an issue getting people on, so which is fantastic. A reminder again that the Tom Petty Project is not affiliated with the Tom Petty estate in any way. So if you're looking for official merchandise, please go to tompetty.com. If you want to watch videos and listen to music, please do that through official channels and go check out the YouTube channel. And don't forget to check out the Tom Petty Nation and Tom Petty Fans Forever Facebook groups. And again, Gwen Jones is the moderator and the creator of the latter, so I'm sure you'd really enjoy that space. It's a great community, and come and join us. Until we meet again next week, keep listening to and sharing Tom's music. Try to be kind. Try to say I love you to someone at least once a day, at least once. Stay safe and healthy, and I'll be back with you next week to talk about track 1 from side 2 of Damn the Torpedoes, Don't Do Me Like That. Bye-bye.